So that fake it till you make it, I feel like if you reframe that a little bit, instead of like pretending like you deserve something, like you are what you think. So if you start to tell yourself, I got this, I deserve this, I'm smart, I am capable, I am skillful, I'm knowledgeable, I'm an expert in this, you'll start to believe those things if you tell yourself those enough times. So that fake it till you make it portion, I think, buys you time. And it allows you to kind of rely on your strengths until you get to the point where you're internalizing the fact that, oh yeah, I belong here.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this episode of First Case, we speak with Lindsay Brown, VP of Sales and Marketing at our sister podcast, Beyond Clean, really the proof of concept for all of the podcasts on the network. Beyond Clean focused on sterile processing, but Lindsay is a dear friend to Melanie and myself. And Melanie, I'm going to let you tell the story. You put together a fantastic lineup for this season. What was it that made Lindsay stand out as somebody that you wanted to have on, as we really did a very unique and what I would consider to be one of the best themed seasons to date?
Well, it actually was when I was hosting a Beyond Clean conference. The conference was the Fast Forward 2022 Accelerating Your Professional Development Conference. And Jamie Taryn was a speaker. Lindsay was a speaker. And I sat and listened to them talk. And Lindsay was talking about professional blind spots and how our limiting mindsets were holding us back. And I thought, we've got to talk about this because we get so, I think, wrapped up in that professional development is just about getting a CE or watching another PowerPoint presentation, getting a check in the box, moving on. And there's so much more to it. And it was a very funny to talk about how a blind spot conversation was very eye-opening, but it was. And I just thought we had to have her on the podcast and we really had to talk about it. And I'm so glad she agreed and said that we could talk about it.
Well, limiting mindsets, you can imagine, means we're going to get into the mentality of professional development today. So stay with us. We're going to be right back after a short break with Lindsay Brown.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Lindsay Brown, VP of Sales and Marketing at Beyond Clean, which is our proof of concept sister podcast focusing on sterile processing. And Lindsay has actually done a presentation on this topic for at least one of our virtual conferences. Lindsay, you can correct me if you've done it for two or an in-person one, which I think
It's been a couple. It's been a couple. Yep, it has.
I was pretty sure. So, Linz, welcome to the show. And I know this is your first appearance on First Case, but for anybody who is paying attention to Beyond Clean, they should be quite familiar with you. So happy to have you for the first time here on our podcast.
I am so excited. And being on the First Case podcast means a lot. And the main reasons why I'm excited, number one, is because I think this particular conversation and the conversations you've been having this season transcend professions. And so I'm excited to dive into limiting mindsets and what's holding people back and kind of that professional development perspective. And secondly, you two are amazing. So why wouldn't I want to sit down for an entire hour and talk about something that I love? This is really, really exciting for me.
I feel like lately, Liz, the only way you could get an hour of my time is to come on a podcast.
You're not, like, for anyone tuning in, he's not joking. Like, I work with this guy, right? And I can't get a word in edgewise. So you're very busy, and I feel honored to have an hour of your time.
Well, I feel honored you're taking time away from the family to join us. For people who don't know, we tend to record these, later in the evenings. And so super appreciative of you taking the time away from your beautiful kids, who are also a ton of fun in the light of your life. And
someday they will. Someday they will listen to this podcast and be like, look what mom did.
Then they'll probably be watching a lot of your presentations too in the virtual conferences. Mm-hmm. Everything lives forever on the internet, it seems. And so, yeah, you're right. You're chronicling your legacy. And this whole season 6, is dedicated to professional development, as you mentioned, Linz. And we're going to be talking about limiting mindsets. We've had several great episodes. And I also know that you have a passion for, women in business, in leadership positions, and specifically professional development for women. And so before we start talking about limiting mindsets and really diving into that, and honestly, we could talk for a great long time on limiting mindsets and still just be scratching the surface. But I also thought you might talk about your passion in this area as well, which you share with some of the other guests that have been joining us this season as well.
Yes. And I learn from those guests on a daily basis. So I'm really excited. I was really excited to see the lineup for season 6 of the First Case podcast. Something that I've learned about myself, I think it was probably in college when I passed out seeing a cadaver. And I had to change from an occupational therapy major to a communications major. Because, seeing that cadaver and hitting the floor, I was like, the medical industry is not for me. It's not for me. And here I am, how many years later back in the healthcare industry. And so it's funny looking back on that now, because what it did is it redirected my path through the communications field and through the public speaking field. And it allowed me to put myself in situations where I was given feedback from people that said, you know what, you have a knack for making people feel good. You have a knack for building people up. And so I just sort of carved out that niche professionally throughout all of my different careers in the coffee industry and healthcare. And I've really clung to that because I think it's really easy for people, for professionals and for women to resort to self-doubt and not necessarily have the language or the concepts to correctly place it so that you can move through it and work through it and overcome. So that's kind of my journey to this passion that I have about professional development in general.
So I need you to just get the couch out in your room and let me lay in it, and we can talk about my own self-doubt and just deal with all of my issues because it is a struggle and it's hard, even with the great team that we have, because Justin, Hank, Brett, Bobby, all you guys are wonderful, but women in healthcare, women in business, there are challenges and there's doubt and there's struggles and how you can grow and how you can advance. And I probably need to go sit on your therapy couch and we need to talk.
I was the first woman to join the Beyond Clean team and talk about, imposter syndrome is something that we'll cover in this conversation, but that feeling of like, holy crap, what am I doing here?
That's me, First Case. I'm the lady.
Oh man. But no, it's really cool to have language to put those, to be able to kind of process those feelings and process those doubts and understand that it's not something that you need to give power to, but it's something that serves a purpose if you can properly work through it. And so that's something I love, is giving people that tool to say, okay, I'm feeling this thing. What is it? What can I do with it? And how can it be productive, either personally or professionally? And that to me is really, really cool.
I love it. I love that.
All right. So why don't we just start with the limiting mindsets? I think a lot of us are going to sit back and go, yeah, I know how I do this to myself, but I'll be honest with you. maybe there are things that we do that are lingering in the background that we really aren't aware of. I mean, yeah, everybody goes through the self-doubt. Everybody goes through those moments where, they're holding back a little bit because they're like, oh, I'm not really sure. But is that what we're talking about with limiting mindsets, or is that just a small piece? How does it fit in?
Yeah, that's a piece of it. I love to, when I give presentations on limiting mindsets and on blind spots and on professional growth and development opportunities, I love to level set a little bit and give some context on what exactly a limiting mindset is. Because for a lot of people, even the term limiting mindset is brand new. It's not something they're familiar with. It's not something they're accustomed to. And it's certainly not part of their vernacular. So understanding the concept and applying it to your life is really hard unless you really understand what that means as a concept. And so limiting mindsets, you can kind of envision a mental ceiling or a mental block, something that keeps you from reaching that next level or improving your position in life or reaching your next potential. So any sort of feeling, any sort of emotion, anything that comes to mind when you think, okay, that's a mental ceiling. That's what I'm referring to when I say limiting mindset. And you can go only so far in life until you hit that mental ceiling. Okay. I'm sure both of you have had the opportunity to hit that mental ceiling in the past. And I say it as an opportunity because it really is that pivotal point, that hinge point that either keeps you stagnant or it forces growth. And I love putting myself in situations that force growth. Not everyone is there, but I think using this term limiting mindset is an opportunity to consider that once you hit that ceiling, that mental ceiling, it's a chance to change something. And so limiting mindsets and those mental ceilings are really, really hard to overcome until you work through them. You can't just skip over them and say, oh, here's a ceiling. I'm just going to boop, 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 go around it, right? That's not how it works. You actually have to do some really hard work to bust through that ceiling. And people can experience limiting mindsets in very different ways. They can feel different. It can take a lot of time to realize that that's actually what's happening, that it's a limitation that you have to push through.
So how do you know when you've hit that ceiling? Because I have a very clear remembrance of when I hit that mental ceiling, and it came with a lot of anxiety, a lot of lack of sleep. And really, I think a lot of people might have called it a midlife crisis if it didn't come with such a situational kind of cause attached to it. And it was the self-doubt of rolling out a brand new IT solution the first time I became an entrepreneur, and I was going to roll it out at one of the top 5 children's hospitals in the world. And so all I could do was think that this thing was going to fail. And that was my limiting mindset. And also that, I hadn't prepared enough or whatnot. And, the truth is it went off way better than I thought it was. But everything leading up to that was just littered with anxiety and self-doubt. I'm not sure that everybody hits a ceiling. Mine might have been a limiting wall. I'm not sure everybody hits one like that and really recognizes it either, right? Like, could you hit the ceiling without even really being aware that you have hit it and that it is actually holding you back?
Totally. And when we get into the conversation about specific limiting mindsets, you'll understand why I say yes to this question, because a limiting mindset looks different for different people. And there are different specific limiting mindsets that you can hit. Like those ceilings can be specific to something. And those somethings are what we're going to get into, which I'm really, really excited about. But to answer your question, yes, you can be existing in that spot where you just keep hitting that wall and really not realize it until you have language that supports your ability to process it. And that's been really profound for me in teaching people and talking with people about limiting mindsets, is like, you don't realize you're there until all of a sudden you have this aha moment where you're like, holy crap, like that resonates. That's exactly what I'm experiencing. And now I have language to use to describe what I'm feeling. Now I can actually see it for what it is and move through it. And until I had that language, I kept hitting those walls and those ceilings and not knowing kind of how to work through them.
I think one of the places in the operating room, especially, where we can almost immediately find a limiting mindset or feel like we're hitting a wall or a ceiling is those people who are new employees, transfer employees from another department into the operating room. But what's that first feeling of overwhelm that says, I can't do this. I'm not going to get it. I will never learn it. This is never going to happen. And all those negatives, never going to happen, not going to do it, can't learn it, that has to be some bit of that limiting mindset that keeps us from succeeding because we don't think we can do it. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just self-doubt is a huge sort of through line through every specific limiting mindset. And something I really want to stress and kind of spend some time on is understanding that knowing your strengths is a really important thing when you're entering new situations, because you can keep coming back to what you are good at and what you feel confident in those situations that are really, really challenging and they're pulling you in different directions that you're not used to. Those strengths can be something that you can come back to and say, okay, no, I am good at this. I do deserve this place at the table. I do deserve this position. I am just in a different stage of development than the people who have been here for 15, 20, 25 years. I heard this analogy once that an acorn is not an imposter oak tree. It's just at a different phase of development. And I think that is right.
Yeah, that's really good.
The second I heard that, I was like, dang it, that is perfect. Like, that is the perfect analogy for, I think, probably any business, but healthcare in general, when the stakes are high, especially in the operating room. You're brand new. You don't have the street smarts yet that your coworkers have. And how can you hold that against yourself? You're just at a different phase of development. And I think it's really important to keep coming back to that.
I think that hits on what you said too about having language to actually describe how you're feeling, because that's a different approach. That is a different language. That is a different way to say that I'm new and learning, but accepting that it is a different phase of development is a mind shift. It is a different way to look at it.
Well, and you don't, like my kids, when they were starting to walk, when they fell down, I wasn't like, oh, you dumb baby. Like,
right.
Why can't you do this? Like,
right.
Of course I encouraged them. And I was like, try again, over and over again. They're a brand new human. They're learning how to do normal human things in the operating room. That's not normal. Like, that's high stakes, that's high pressure, and you're all of a sudden expected to know all of this stuff that you haven't experienced live yet. And there's an opportunity to reframe how new employees are viewed in terms of that developmental phase.
So earlier you mentioned the way to define limiting mindsets. What kind of terminology can we use when we're looking at defining that?
Yeah. So anytime you look at any sort of mental ceiling or limiting mindset, again, having that language is really important to help you process. And I mentioned the analogy of the acorn not being an imposter oak tree, and that's tied directly to imposter syndrome. This is a hugely powerful concept to understand and to familiarize yourself with, because really what it means is you feel like an imposter in your current situation. You feel like either you don't deserve the position that you're in, you feel like you don't have the skills or the expertise or the knowledge to succeed in that position, and you think that somebody else is better suited for it, and that's just the way it is. That's you feeling like an imposter. And I think this is a really, and studies show that women more so than men feel imposter syndrome as a limiting mindset in general. Something about imposter syndrome that I think is really powerful is just recognizing that you're in that developmental process. And that's really the only way through. And I have tried to shift my language to not say like things like get over it, things like
suck it up.
Like, I try to use language like work through it and move through it, because I feel like it's really an opportunity to take advantage of the learning opportunity, to take advantage of really coming into the understanding of where you're at emotionally, mentally, physically, as it relates to these limiting mindsets, so that you can recognize them again when they happen again. So imposter syndrome, I'm not the real deal. I don't deserve to be here. And maybe you guys have felt that in the past. I'm sure some people listening in are like, oh, wow, that's what I was feeling when I started my new job, or when I got that promotion, or when I joined this new company. Like I felt like it wasn't something that I deserved. That's one of the concepts that I definitely wanted to bring up in this conversation.
So you talked about focusing on strengths. And so what I heard you talk about too is just like being able to live in this state of discomfort without letting it paralyze you, right? And that can be a very difficult thing. But I think that's why you mentioned before focusing on your strengths, because you can't possibly grow if you already know everything. Because if you already knew how to do everything, it wouldn't be growth. You'd just be wash, rinse, repeat. And that's that. And you'd be doing something you've always been capable of doing. Now, in that discomfort or that state of discomfort that you have to live in to grow, focusing on your strengths can help you kind of build that foundation so that you know that you're bringing something to the table. And then at the same time, hopefully one of the things you're bringing to the table is the desire to learn the things you don't know and apply the principles in the areas of strengths that you have to be able to do something really great with it. And I think of that saying, I know he just threw away, suck it up and things like that are not helpful. But one that I think came about because of this is fake it till you make it. Because, a lot of times I can see where that would reinforce imposter syndrome. I'm just faking it. But if you subscribe to that kind of mentality, eventually you do make it. And it's all about the fortitude to get through that period of growth and discomfort. Would you agree with that or only a little bit?
Yeah. So what it makes me think of is the idea that if you put a smile on your face or if you fake laugh, you can trick your brain into thinking you're happy and it will release good hormones. Okay. So that fake it till you make it, I feel like if you reframe that a little bit, instead of like pretending like you deserve something, like you are what you think. So if you start to tell yourself, I got this, I deserve this, I'm smart, I am capable, I am skillful, I'm knowledgeable, I'm an expert in this, you'll start to believe those things if you tell yourself those enough times. So that fake it till you make it portion, I think, buys you time. And it allows you to kind of rely on your strengths until you get to the point where you're internalizing the fact that, oh yeah, I belong here. Something I want to point out about strengths, and this has been like one of those hold up a mirror to myself opportunities, is understanding that our strengths can become a weakness. And I think this is a really interesting sort of opportunity to understand language around strengths as well. I like to use the analogy of a fire. Okay, a fire contained in the hearth is beautiful. It adds warmth. It adds coziness. But a fire let outside the hearth can destroy an entire home. So with proper boundaries, that fire is a positive thing. It's a beautiful thing. But without proper boundaries, it's destructive. And so I've had the opportunity over the past couple of years to take a look at my personal strengths, things like positivity or relator, for example. And you may think, well, what could be bad about being positive? Like, that's a strength, but what's bad about it? But what I need to remember is that without a healthy boundary around that strength, if I'm not mindful about my positivity, I can be perceived as lacking in empathy. Like if someone's sharing a really, really hard story with me, or they're in a really, really bad place, me saying, oh, don't worry, it's going to get better. Don't worry about that. It's not as bad as you think. That could be perceived as, wow, you don't get it. Like you are not the person to support me. And so I think that's an opportunity too, as you develop your strengths, to know what kind of healthy boundaries you can put around them.
It's interesting. You just said if you keep telling yourself those positive thoughts, there's a lot of things you can do, like with hormones, endorphins, et cetera, to sort of, and also to not trick your brain to thinking that the world is ending outside of the body. And that whole parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system concept, biologically, you're programming. But I also think it's not about getting yourself to, believe that those things are true until they're true. It's about becoming what you're telling yourself you can be. And it's a lot different than having a false belief.
I love the idea of faking it till you make it as a way of buying yourself time to come into your own, right? Instead of just, continuing to exist, still feeling like you're an imposter that whole time, just buying yourself time to really come into the idea that you deserve what you're getting and where you've gone.
So we've talked about imposter syndrome, and that is very much a limiting mindset for sure. But there has to be more than that. What other limiting mindsets do we see in our personal and professional lives?
Yeah, another one that I like to teach on when I do give this presentation is one called scarcity mentality, where you're always looking at a situation at a lack, quote unquote. And I've certainly witnessed this through some of the mentoring that I've done with sterile processing professionals in this space. Really what it comes down to is you view the situation you're in as though you have to cling to something. You have to hold tight to something because there's not enough to go around. And it creates this hierarchical thinking. Think of a healthcare hospital department where there are promotions available, for example. Having that scarcity mentality can keep you in the mindset that, like, if you don't get this, there won't be any other opportunities for you. And that can hold us back, because if you don't get that promotion and you do go into it thinking there won't be another opportunity for me to grow, that scarcity mentality can really hold you back from being open to opportunities that you may not know about yet that are coming your way.
Yeah, it can make you give up. Be like, well, I'm not going to try anymore
absolutely.
Because there's nothing else available for me. So why should I even bother? And really, that's not true. But it is, I can see that definitely for sure, limiting you and holding you back. What else is there? Teach me more.
Perfectionism. Oh,
yep. I'm guilty.
I know. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
I love talking about perfectionism because it is counterfeit to excellence. I love saying that out loud. Now, Melanie, hear me say that again. Perfectionism is counterfeit to excellence. Here's something that holds so many people back, and I'm guilty of this in my past too. If it's not perfect, I cannot put it out into the world. That is something that holds so many people back. And I love how all of these limiting mindsets are connected, because again, coming back to that acorn is just a different developmental phase than the oak tree. Like, putting something out into the universe is the perfect way to get feedback, is the perfect way to get data and reassess how you can improve or what you would do next time. It's an opportunity for you to just put something out there, gather the data, and iterate again and again and again. It reminds me of the tech industry when new apps come out, right? There's a new app on your phone. There's feedback that's given to the app developer. And then they make it better and they re-release it. And then they make it better and they release it again. They iterate upon iterate. And I think that opportunity for data gathering, so that the next time you come at a situation, it can be even better. Understanding that that's part of the developmental process is just so cool. But it's hard to keep that perspective when you're like, gosh, this isn't perfect, so I just can't put it out there.
So when I was hitting my ceiling, Linz, I had somebody, ironically, I was just talking to an artist friend as I was at the bus stop with the kids, and I was lamenting on how I wasn't sleeping and how much stress I was placing on myself. And I can't remember who he referenced. I want to say it was Elon Musk, but I'm not sure. But the quote was, go at 80%. And he said, because if you wait until it's 100%, you're never going to go, which means you'll never accomplish anything. If you go at 80%, you've got enough there that you're going to work out the remaining 20% long before anybody else sees the 20%. So get it rolling at 80, start figuring things out, and you'll solve the 20% before anybody catches up. And he was dead right about that.
I love that. Have you either of you heard the term analysis paralysis?
Oh, yes. Yes. Guilty.
Yes. Yep. So that's tied to perfectionism. Like, you essentially are trying to create this perfect thing to put out into the world. And it's until you get it perfect. Here's the thing. it will never be perfect in your mind. So all of a sudden you have this analysis paralysis, like trying to consider all the different ways that you can improve and essentially just becoming stuck in this frozen state and not doing anything at all. That doesn't serve you. That doesn't serve the people around you. It doesn't serve the mission that you've taken on in life. So I think perfectionism can really, really hold people back. And I think what's interesting about this limiting mindset is it's one that a lot of people hang their hat on, which is funny to me, having learned about it now in this, like, an opportunity to work through perfectionism instead of like use it as a badge of honor. Learning that differentiation was really powerful for me.
So if it's like you're stepping on all of my toes here because all of these are my problems and I have issues. But the analysis paralysis was very true for me when I was a new manager, because you would have to do any type of employee discipline or, and you would overthink it to death until you just don't do anything because you don't know if you've addressed it correctly, or, rolling out new policies, new procedures, new training. How are we going to do it? I was a mess. I don't think there I am, a limiting mindset. I'm not cut out for leadership because that's what I think. But this is proof. See, I analyzed.
That was the best moment of this podcast, Melanie. The self-awareness in the moment. Beautiful.
I analyzed myself to death and I will come to the conclusion that I'm not good at it. But there are ways to work through this. And obviously I need help, and I'm sure everybody else in the world does too. So how do we work through these limiting mindsets and get on the other side of it?
Yes. Great question. I think there are a couple really important ways that you can work through and move through limiting mindsets. The first of which is recognizing seasonal shifts. Okay. Recognizing that there are seasons in life that you'll feel like you're essentially being pulled back and nothing's going right and everything's working against you. But if you think of that season of life, like every time you enter a challenging season, picture it as like a personal slingshot. Okay. Like you're being pulled back so that you can gain perspective, so that when that sling shoots, I don't know what the proper term is, but when the slingshot releases, like you're all of a sudden, you have that perspective from all the challenges you face that it will propel you that much farther forward, that much more quickly. So I think recognizing that life is dynamic, recognizing that professional growth is dynamic. It's not static. It's not like you've achieved this level, now you'll never experience anything that you've experienced in the past. Like that's not real.
Right.
That's not a thing. There will be shifts. There will be changes. There will be ebbs and flows. And I think it's important to realize that and give yourself grace around it and understand that there's a way that you can reframe those periods of time where you are facing those challenges and hitting those ceilings in a way that can be super powerful and beneficial if you can view them through the right lens. Having that developmental perspective is huge. Like I hope the one thing, if there's one thing people take away from this interview, it's that acorn oak tree analogy, because I really do think that's really cool. Understanding that being at an acorn stage doesn't make you any less of, an oak tree. You'll be there someday. You'll get there. But there's a journey ahead of you to get there. And so, sort of paying tribute and, understanding that journey is really important is a big part of overcoming limiting mindsets. Another thing, like once you're able to add language to limiting mindsets, like you did in real time, Melanie. I love that so much. Once you're able to add language to limiting mindsets, when you remove that negative, replace it with a positive. Like once you stop telling yourself that one negative thing, replace it with a positive thing. Like instead of saying, I'm not good enough to lead this team. Once you get to a point where you can stop saying that, replace it with, wow, the fact that I am a developer at heart, that I can connect people really well, makes me well suited for this leadership position. So really finding an opportunity to tit for tat, replace that negative with a positive. And then understanding inflow and outflow. Being healthy means that you have fresh inflow and fresh outflow. So if you're giving of yourself, find ways to be fed. by activities or people or things around you, because it's really important. You can't pour from an empty cup. I'll use that analogy. And I think a lot of that rings true in the operating room, because a lot of people likely feel depleted. I'm sure you're probably talking with someone about burnout at some point.
It's coming up.
But that fresh inflow, that fresh outflow, I think is really important for not only being in a mental state to recognize limiting mindsets, but to also then be able to actually work through them in a way that's healthy, that's helpful, and that gives you perspective that you can then use when you come up upon those challenges or those limiting mindsets again in the future.
One of the things that I feel like is a really good predictor of success, and you hear about it all the time, is just attitude. And while you're applying a lot of concrete concepts and skills and terminology to this process, I feel like attitude is one of those that is a little more, I don't know, it's not as defined. You can tell it. You can look at somebody and say, oh, they have a great attitude, or I love your attitude, right? Or I don't like your attitude. If you have a teenage child at home. And so the attitude thing, you can spot it a mile away, but I think it's a lot harder to like define and shape, et cetera. So how does attitude influence people's approach and their ability to navigate this process of moving through limiting mindsets so that they can grow? How does that come into play?
Attitude's an interesting concept because you're right. It is sort of this sort of elusive, there's really no concrete way to describe someone's attitude except positive or negative or good or bad. But I think what it comes down to is the ability to think of a challenge in one of two ways. You can think of a challenge as a stumbling block, something that's holding you back, something that you can't overcome, or understanding that looking at challenges in one of those two ways can really shape your ability to move through those challenges.
I think it's true, though. I mean, my mindset is going to determine how I react to my challenge, to the stumbling block, or to the issue that I'm going back to talking about new people in the OR. If I think I'm never going to get it and I'm not going to get it, and I go with that attitude and mindset, then I'm probably going to struggle, and it's going to be very difficult to succeed. And if I work on changing that mindset to, okay, this is hard, but I can learn it. I know I'm a smart person. I can get this one step at a time. I have good mentors. Then I'm setting myself up for success just from my attitude alone to get through that stumbling block and move forward and be successful.
Yeah, I almost feel like attitude is a great predictor of whether or not you're going to have limiting mindsets as you approach challenges ongoing.
Yeah. Melanie, I love that you just used the word mindset, because we always talk about mindset in a positive sense, right? Having a positive mindset allows you to do X, Y, and Z. And I think similar to strengths, there's a shadow side to mindsets, and that's where the limiting mindsets come in. And so finally having language to describe those particular feelings, those thoughts, those emotions, I think can be really, really powerful.
So Linz, great job. Time always flies on these interviews. And I love this whole conversation today. And your personal story is one that exemplifies this. And maybe nobody knows that, but I can tell you, I really appreciate your perspective on this because of who you are. And I loved the whole shadow kind of analogy, metaphor, whatever it is, in the very end there. And is there anything that you want to say as we kind of wrap up and close the interview? And I do want to remind everybody, if they want to see the full presentation, there's so many topics on this that we didn't even cover in this interview, that they can definitely go over to the Beyond Clean website, beyondclean.net. They can see virtual conferences, presentations. They can reach out to you by emailing Lindsay, Lindsay at beyondclean.net. But anything you want to add before we wrap up?
The only thing that I will add is just more of a reiteration than anything, just the power of having language to use when you're working through whatever challenges you're facing. And hopefully this interview provided some additional context and language that you can then apply to your personal and professional lives to help you get to that next level.
That was Lindsay Brown, VP of Sales and Marketing at Beyond Clean. And Melanie, just a great conversation about professional development, but really the mental side. You know, professional development, as we've already talked about, doesn't necessarily mean schooling and education. We talked a lot about that with Jamie Tarrin, but this is the mental side of it. And I loved how we tied in attitude at the end. It can be so difficult to maintain a positive attitude, especially underneath times of stress, which also happen to be the most challenging times that we go through. And so, you know, you almost have to build that attitude fortress to be able to get yourself through those moments, because not all challenges and growth opportunities come from something that we plan on.
You are not wrong. And I think the Attitude Fortress is probably a good comparison for professional development, for our experiences in the operating room. We are constantly in a stressful environment, and we are working in this environment day in and day out. And our attitude makes all the difference in the world, not only in the day and getting through it, but then, like we talked about, what is that attitude that we have? What are we looking forward to doing professionally, and how are we going to grow? And is our attitude and our mindset helping us, or is it hindering us? And definitely a lot here in this interview that we can apply to make sure we have that positive attitude and that good attitude fortress to move forward.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. So many great ones this season on professional development. And if you like it and you like what you're hearing, I'm going to just start by asking you to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We have some episodes that have bonus content, but that's only accessible if you download the smartphone app. But if you don't want another app on your phone, I get it. Just go ahead and subscribe to First Case on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. If you don't like any of those, you can find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or just simply search for First Case on your favorite podcast application. And while you're there downloading the app, we would really love a rating and a review, because your feedback is important to the show. And you can send feedback to us directly by emailing info@firstcasemedia.com. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case.